GM and Ford are pulling out of the US and pouring investments into China and Mexico, not just a business move, but the start of a global power shift. Who will win in the age of electric vehicles, and who will be left behind? In today's video, we're diving into a topic that's stirring up a lot of debate. But first, a quick note. This content is for analysis and educational purposes only. It does not represent any political stance or organization. Let's approach it with an open mind and a critical perspective. GM and Ford go global. As the world enters the era of electric vehicles, General Motors, GM, and Ford, two iconic pillars of American automotive heritage, have made bold moves, slashing thousands of jobs and shifting their investments overseas. But this isn't just about business. It's a clear sign of a broader geopolitical and technological restructuring underway within the heart of the global auto industry. GM shocked the public by announcing the layoff of 14,000 employees and the closure of 5 plants across the United States. This wasn't just about cutting costs. It reflected a long-term vision, pivoting towards electric vehicles, EVs, while expanding production in China and India, two populous nations experiencing rapid urbanization and offering strong government incentives for EV adoption. Ford has taken a similar path, cutting 2,000 jobs and pouring $50 billion into its T3 project, which aims to develop the next generation of electric vehicles. Notably, Ford has partnered with Blue Oval Sky and BML to advance solid-state battery technology, a major leap in efficiency and durability compared to traditional lithium-ion batteries. This innovation not only boosts EV range but also drastically reduces charging time, a crucial factor in winning over global consumers. Yet, there's a deeper layer to this story: the shift in the global supply chain. GM and Ford's aggressive investments in Mexico, India, China, and Southeast Asia reflect a reality where lower labor costs, regulatory flexibility, and proximity to strategic resources like lithium and cobalt make developing countries more attractive than the US. However, this transformation leaves significant gaps in employment and social welfare across America's industrial heartlands. Cities once known as part of the Rust Belt, like Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, are facing steep job losses, leading not only to economic hardship, but also to growing social discontent and political polarization. An undeniable truth emerges. In this new era of globalization, the nation that controls battery technology and EV production will hold strategic dominance, not just economically, but politically, from energy security to global supply chain control. As China continues to dominate rare earth mining, refining, and battery manufacturing, American companies going abroad is also a strategic repositioning in the face of rising competition with Beijing. GM and Ford are choosing the optimal path for shareholders and market value. But is it still the path for American workers? The real question isn't just who will make electric cars, but who will benefit from the technological dream, and who will be left behind. What do you think? One day your kid might ask, "Dad, where are American cars made?" And you'll have to say, Beijing or Bangalore. Drop your guess in the comments. Let's see who predicts the EV future better than Tesla. Trump strikes back with heavy tariffs. In response to major corporations like GM and Ford shifting production out of the United States, President Donald Trump unleashed his most powerful economic weapon, a 200% tariff on imported cars and products. This move was intended as a hardline message, designed to pressure companies into reinvesting domestically and to punish countries seen as benefiting from America's trade imbalance, especially China, Germany, Japan, and Mexico. However, instead of pulling production back to the U.S., the policy triggered a wave of negative fallout, rattling financial markets and disrupting global supply chains. Immediately after the tariff announcement, U.S. stock markets plunged, the Dow Jones dropped more than 800 points in just 48 hours, while the Nasdaq and S&P 500 followed suit amid fears of skyrocketing input costs and weakening consumer demand. International automakers, many of which operate supply chains stretching from Asia to Latin America, began freezing investments or redirecting them toward more trade-friendly regions like Canada and Southeast Asia. And it wasn't just the auto industry. Consumer goods, including home appliances, computers, smartphones, and even medical devices, were impacted, as many of their components and raw materials are sourced abroad. According to estimates from the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, Trump's tariffs caused the average American household to pay an additional $800 to $1,200 per year due to rising product prices. More critically, the move triggered a cascade of retaliatory tariffs from major trade partners. China struck back with steep duties on U.S. soybeans, pork, and aircraft parts, targeting agricultural and industrial states that form Trump's electoral base. The European Union retaliated with tariffs on bourbon, motorcycles, and textiles. Countries like Canada and India quickly followed suit. At a deeper level, this policy exposed a structural weakness in American manufacturing, its heavy reliance on a global supply network that cannot be rebuilt overnight. Most lithium batteries, rare earth magnets, and semiconductor components, crucial for cars, phones, and advanced weapons, are made overseas, primarily in China and South Korea. Tariffs didn't drive companies back home. They simply raised costs, creating a patchwork economy with inflated prices but no equivalent rise in added value. Politically, Trump's 200% tariff move may have appealed to protectionist voters, but it alienated the business community, especially multinational corporations and high-tech industries that have been the backbone of American growth in the digital era. Leading CEOs, from Apple to Tesla, have warned that the trade war could undermine America's long-term competitiveness, rather than generate the domestic jobs it promised. Labor displacement and the rise of the invisible workforce. As corporate giants like GM and Ford chase global competitiveness, and governments escalate trade wars in the name of national interest, a silent casualty is emerging: the American industrial workforce. Not just the factory workers in Ohio or Michigan, but a broader, often overlooked class of displaced laborers, contractors, gig workers, supply chain drivers, and warehouse staff, those who form the skeletal system of the economy, but lack its protections. This labor class is now facing a new wave of vulnerability. With the decline of traditional manufacturing jobs, many have turned to logistics and gig work, sectors heavily reliant on the very international supply chains that tariffs are disrupting. When factories shut down or shift overseas, the ripple effect is felt not only in unemployment numbers, but in the erosion of job quality across the board. Benefits vanish. Job security disappears. And with AI and automation accelerating across warehouse systems and EV production lines, even these backup options are on shaky ground. The result? A growing subclass of workers who are employed but not empowered, caught in a paradox where work is plentiful, but prosperity is not. America's labor policy is being outpaced by a global economy that no longer plays by the old rules. Without a bold reimagining of worker protections, training, and ownership in the new green and digital economies, this invisible workforce may become the most economically endangered demographic of the 21st century. America's allies strike back. When the Trump administration imposed a 200% tariff on imported goods to protect domestic industry, key U.S. allies didn't just voice opposition, they responded with calculated and strategic countermeasures that threatened the very foundations of America's global financial and trade dominance. 1. Japan's Treasury sell-off, a wake-up call to Washington's financial core. In a move that reverberated across global markets, Japan, long the second-largest foreign holder of U.S. Treasury securities, made the stunning decision to offload nearly $1.7 trillion worth of American debt. This was not merely an economic adjustment, it was a powerful geopolitical message aimed directly at the heart of Washington's financial machinery. The consequences were immediate and significant. Long-term bond yields surged as supply flooded the market, making it more expensive for the U.S. government to borrow. This in turn tightened fiscal leeway at a time when the Federal Reserve is already walking a precarious tightrope, trying to tame inflation without throttling economic recovery. Meanwhile, the U.S. dollar softened as capital retreated from Treasury markets, further unsettling global investors. But the implications stretch far beyond Wall Street. Japan's divestment reflects mounting unease with the United States' increasingly unpredictable fiscal and geopolitical behavior, from erratic trade policies to wavering regional alliances in Asia. By pivoting away from U.S. debt, Japan isn't just diversifying its holdings, it's making a statement that no financial relationship, no matter how entrenched, is immune to political risk. The very credibility of the U.S. as a stable, long-term economic partner is being called into question, not by rivals, but by longtime allies. Two, EU's tariff counterstrike, a new trade war brews across the Atlantic. The European Union, no longer willing to play a passive role in the U.S.-China trade confrontation, launched its own wave of retaliatory tariffs, 25% across a spectrum of key American exports. What followed was not just a diplomatic rebuke, but a direct economic assault on some of the most vital industries of the United States. Automobiles, American-made pickups, sports cars, and electric vehicles suddenly became 25% more expensive in EU markets, making them virtually uncompetitive overnight. Automakers like Ford, GM, and Tesla lost crucial ground in markets like Germany, France, and the Netherlands, where U.S. brands were once symbols of modern performance. Agriculture and food, staples such as U.S. beef, soybeans, corn, and peanut butter were swiftly undercut by suppliers from Canada, Australia, and the EU itself. European consumers, known for valuing domestic and regional sourcing, pivoted quickly, accelerating losses for American farmers. Industrial goods, tariffs on steel, aluminum, and heavy machinery further isolated U.S. manufacturers, driving European firms to forge new supply chains with Asia and Latin America. The ripple effects impacted U.S. regions that had bet heavily on industrial exports, including states like Michigan and Ohio, areas that were key pillars of Trump's political base. This isn't just a temporary setback. It represents the crystallization of an emerging reality, that American economic power, once assumed to be indispensable, is now being challenged by an increasingly assertive and independent European bloc. What was once a transatlantic partnership is evolving into a global contest for influence, economic, political, and strategic. 3. Global finance recalibrates. The world edges away from the dollar. Taken together, the actions of Japan and the EU signify something far more profound than short-term retaliation. They point to a slow but decisive unraveling of the global financial order long anchored by U.S. leadership and the supremacy of the dollar. The rise of alternatives. Europe is accelerating the development of INSTEX, a financial vehicle designed to facilitate trade outside of the U.S.-dominated SWIFT system. Meanwhile, bilateral trade agreements in euros, yen, and yuan are gaining traction globally, from Southeast Asia to South America. The decline of the petrodollar. China and Saudi Arabia are actively exploring oil transactions priced in yuan, a development that strikes at the very foundation of the petrodollar system, a key pillar of the dollar's global dominance since the 1970s. Diversification of reserves. Central banks from Africa to Latin America are quietly shifting away from U.S. dollar holdings, favoring a mix of gold, euro-denominated bonds, and Japanese government securities. This is not an anti-American revolt, but a strategic recalibration to hedge against U.S. volatility and rising geopolitical risk. In essence, what we are witnessing is the emergence of a multipolar financial world, one where the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency is no longer guaranteed by default, but constantly tested by trust, stability, and consistency. If Washington continues to weaponize its financial power through tariffs, sanctions, and unilateral policy swings, It may find itself presiding over a system that no longer revolves around it. Widespread fallout. The Trump administration's 200% tariff policy wasn't just a shock to businesses and allies, it became a form of indirect taxation on the wallets of everyday American consumers. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, and independent studies, consumer prices, ranging from cars and smartphones to packaged foods, rose an average of 0.4% to 0.6% within the first 12 months of implementation. This level of inflation has added an estimated $800 to $1,200 per year in extra costs for the average American household, not including hidden expenses like maintenance, replacement parts, and higher operating costs. 1. Automobiles, from symbol of freedom to a high-priced privilege. For generations, the car has been more than just a vehicle in the United States. It has been a cultural icon, a symbol of mobility, independence, and economic participation. The ability to own and drive a car represented the heart of the American dream. Yet today, that dream is slipping away for countless working and middle-class Americans as automobiles transition from accessible necessities to increasingly unaffordable luxuries. The imposition of tariffs on imported automotive parts and fully assembled vehicles has had a domino effect throughout the industry. Whether it's a practical sedan or a family-size SUV, price increases now range from $1,200 to $2,000 per vehicle. For many consumers already grappling with stagnant wages and rising living costs, this added expense pushes car ownership out of reach or into the realm of debt. Auto giants like Hyundai, Toyota, and Nissan, brands that once represented affordable reliability, are adapting by relocating production to countries like Canada, Mexico, and across Europe in an attempt to bypass the new tariff burdens. But this strategy comes with a steep domestic cost, the slow erosion of American manufacturing jobs. States such as Kentucky, Alabama, and Tennessee, once thriving centers of auto manufacturing, are witnessing plant slowdowns, job cuts, and supply chain disruptions. It's not just about economics. These changes disrupt local economies that have long depended on the automotive industry to sustain communities. Skilled workers, mechanics, engineers, logistics specialists are being sidelined by global decisions made in distant boardrooms. The message is clear. While globalization may protect corporate profits, it can leave American workers dangerously exposed. The car, once a tool of liberation, is becoming a luxury symbol that reveals the widening gap between economic policy and lived reality. 2. Electronics and tech. Innovation undermined, consumers in the crosshairs. The digital world is one we all depend on, from communication and work to education and entertainment. Yet the technology that supports our daily lives is becoming less accessible and, paradoxically, less advanced. With the U.S. imposing steep tariffs on goods imported from Asia, the cost of electronics has surged across the board, making even basic tech devices harder to afford. A new iPhone model released after 2023 may now cost consumers between $80 to $150 more. Laptops from Dell or HP, smartphones, tablets, gaming consoles like PlayStation and Xbox, all have seen price hikes ranging from 5% to 10%, but this is only part of the story. What's equally troubling is the quiet compromise on quality. To avoid losing market share, many manufacturers are opting to reduce costs in other areas, cutting back on product innovation, using cheaper materials, or offering scaled-down features. This means that while consumers are paying more, they're often getting less. In effect, what was once a consumer's gateway to opportunity, technology, is becoming a tool of exclusion. Moreover, the tech sector thrives on momentum and innovation. The slowdown in global supply chains, coupled with rising production costs, may stifle progress, limit research, and restrict access to next-generation tools. Students may delay upgrading laptops. Families may forgo smart devices, and small businesses relying on affordable tech to compete may fall behind. This is no longer just an issue of affordability. It's a question of long-term competitiveness and equality in access to innovation. The global trade order, a quiet but decisive realignment. As the United States doubles down on unilateral tariffs and protectionist measures, a quieter, more strategic transformation is unfolding across the rest of the world. Major economies are not reacting with confrontation, they're responding with reinvention. While Washington seeks to wall itself off, other nations are methodically redrawing the blueprint of international trade, and in doing so, they are steadily prying global influence away from the U.S. and the almighty dollar. 1. A post-dollar era. The rise of independent trade ecosystems. Across Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, powerful economies are building financial architectures that no longer orbit around the U.S. dollar. This isn't just a temporary hedge against economic turbulence. It's a deliberate shift in long-term strategy. China has begun pricing oil deals with Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia in its own currency, the yuan, signaling its intent to elevate the renminbi as a global medium of exchange. Alongside this, Beijing is pushing forward the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and the CIPS payment network, rivals to the dollar-centric SWIFT system. India, too, is striking trade deals in rupees with countries like Russia, the UAE, and Indonesia, seeking to insulate itself from dollar fluctuations and future geopolitical risk. Meanwhile, the ASEAN bloc is actively considering the use of local currencies for intra-regional trade, a move that would further decentralize global currency dependence. These moves are not simply financial housekeeping. They are structural recalibrations aimed at reducing vulnerability to U.S. sanctions, minimizing exposure to U.S. monetary policy, and reclaiming economic sovereignty. 2. China's Belt and Road, building power through connectivity. In stark contrast to the U.S.'s retrenchment, China is broadening its reach with a sweeping and methodical strategy, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. More than just an infrastructure investment plan, BRI is Beijing's bid to embed itself into the very veins of global trade. By 2024, over 150 nations and organizations had entered into BRI agreements. Through ports in Sri Lanka, railways in Kenya, highways in Eastern Europe, and logistics centers across Central Asia, China is quietly weaving a new web of dependency. The strategic brilliance lies not in loud declarations, but in the quiet certainty of roads that lead to Beijing. This is not simply about steel and concrete, it's about narrative control. While Washington issues warnings, China offers contracts. While the U.S. pulls back, China builds forward. This is how soft power grows, through predictable access, stable financing, and perceived reliability. 3. A shifting axis. The U.S. drifts from the epicenter of trade for decades. The U.S. dollar was not just a currency, it was leverage. But as trade volumes increasingly flow through alternate routes and currencies, the foundation of America's economic might is slowly eroding. The era of dollar hegemony, once cemented after World War II, now faces its most serious challenges in a generation. The implications are sweeping. Washington's ability to enforce economic sanctions may diminish as fewer transactions flow through dollar-based systems. Emerging economies are finding new development partners, ones that do not tie assistance to political conformity or Wall Street speculation. Alternative currencies like the yuan, euro, and regional digital tokens may gradually usurp the dollar's role in global reserves and trade. This isn't just about money, it's about momentum. As the world becomes multipolar in commerce, the U.S. finds itself less as a conductor and more as a bystander, watching as others compose the new symphony of global trade. Green technology is the next battlefield for economic power. Beyond the headlines of layoffs and tariffs, a quieter war is intensifying, one not fought with trade barriers, but with lithium, cobalt, solar panels, and patents. As the world pivots to decarbonization, green technology is becoming the new metric of national power. And the United States, for all its economic muscle, risks falling behind. China currently refines over 70% of the world's lithium and dominates solar panel manufacturing. Europe is accelerating its Green Deal and has already locked in continent-wide carbon border taxes and clean energy subsidies. Meanwhile, the U.S. remains divided, politically and economically, on how to transition from fossil fuel dependence to clean technology leadership. Without a comprehensive industrial policy that combines innovation, strategic investment, and international collaboration, America may lose more than market share. It may lose its influence over the very technologies that will define future transportation, energy, and defense systems. The Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, is a first step, injecting subsidies into EV and battery manufacturing. But time is running short. If Washington continues to focus more on trade retaliation than innovation acceleration, it may find itself defending yesterday's industries while others shape tomorrow's global standards. The next superpower won't just dominate militarily. It will dominate clean energy, clean transport, and clean data. The EV race is just the beginning. National security in the EV era. From oil dependence to battery vulnerability. For decades, national security strategies were shaped around oil, its supply, routes, and control. Wars were waged, alliances formed, and foreign policies dictated by the need to protect fossil fuel interests. But in the 21st century, a dramatic shift is underway. The future of energy security is no longer crude oil, but critical minerals and battery components. The transition to electric vehicles has exposed a new layer of vulnerability. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, these are the lifeblood of EV batteries, and the vast majority are mined or processed in a handful of countries, often under unstable or authoritarian regimes. Over 80% of the world's refined cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and more than half of global lithium refining occurs in China. This dependency introduces not just supply risk, but strategic exposure. Any disruption, whether from political instability, export bans, or cyber attacks on processing facilities, could paralyze entire sectors of the U.S. economy. The Department of Defense has already flagged this as a critical concern, warning that the EV transition may become a national security liability unless domestic sourcing and recycling infrastructure is scaled up. In essence, the move away from oil hasn't eliminated energy insecurity. It has rebranded it. The battlefield has shifted from pipelines to battery plants. If the U.S. fails to secure its mineral supply chains, its ambitions for both climate leadership and military readiness could be severely compromised. Mexico's moment, the rise of nearshoring and a new industrial powerhouse. As American companies like GM and Ford retreat from U.S. soil, they're not just chasing cheap labor. They're betting big on a new strategic model, nearshoring to Mexico. Unlike traditional offshoring to China or Southeast Asia, nearshoring brings production closer to the U.S. border, balancing lower costs with greater control, shorter logistics, and reduced geopolitical risk. Mexico is rapidly emerging as the new Detroit of North America. With a skilled labor force, favorable trade terms under the USMCA agreement, and growing investments in EV infrastructure, the country is becoming a magnet for global manufacturers. Tesla, BMW, and even battery makers like CATL and LG have announced or expanded operations in Mexico's booming industrial corridor. But this transformation carries significant implications. On one hand, it offers a partial solution to U.S. supply chain fragility, reducing dependence on China while keeping production within the Western Hemisphere. On the other hand, it exacerbates domestic job losses in the U.S., fueling political backlash and populist narratives. Moreover, Mexico's rise as a manufacturing hub is changing its role on the world stage. No longer just a junior partner in NAFTA-era trade, It is becoming a regional anchor in the green transition, with the potential to influence standards, labor dynamics, and innovation across the Americas. This isn't just about geography, it's about geopolitical repositioning. As Washington debates tariffs and industrial policy, companies are already moving south, reshaping North American economics in real time. The EV race isn't just about technology, it's about a global power shift. As GM and Ford exit the US to invest in China and Mexico, the real question is no longer who builds the cars, but who controls the future. In this new era, the nation that owns the batteries, flexible labor, and global supply chains will come out on top. And the one left behind might just be the birthplace of the American automotive dream. Thank you for watching until the end of the video. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us in continuing to deliver more balanced and realistic analysis. Feel free to leave a comment below. We always value every perspective shared in a constructive spirit. See you in the next video.